microphones are on.
Hey, call meeting to order. First item of business, adoption of minutes. Can we go with it?
Mr. Chair, I would like to note that I've received one other business item in advance of this meeting. It concerns FCM Standing Committee's renewal and was raised by Councillor Cirillo.
Any other items?
Item 2 is a delegation. Mr. Chair, I'd like to note that we were advised earlier this afternoon that the delegation will not be able to appear today and have withdrawn from today's agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to our first report of staff. Item 3 is the proposed scope and process to update the Multiculturalism Strategic Plan. We have introductory comments by the GM Planning and Development and the presentation by a major project planner.
So you didn't call for the adoption of the minutes?
Oh, sorry. I'm moving ahead.
Oh, she just wants to get to know.
If I can track back there.
Yes, please.
The first item is the minutes. Recommendation to approve.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried.
And now to item 3.
Bring the center of purgatory halfway around the world. Some cold, miserable, dark, half the year. Sun never rises. The winter.
Urge you from leaving.
Mr. McIntyre.
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. Just a few opening remarks from myself before I hand off to Andrew and Tasha. This is an initial proposed scope and process report for revisiting and updating the city's multiculturalism strategic plan. And for those that are relatively new to council, you may not be aware, we've had that plan on the books since 2011, I think is when we prepared the multiculturalism strategic plan. And over the years, it served us well. There's a number of actions coming out of that document we followed up on. Some really big successes like the Welcome to Coquitlam piece and some of the other consultation. As part of the Multiculturalism Advisory Committee's annual work program, they've kept an eye on that strategic plan, and there's been a lot of discussion about areas that could benefit from some focused review and updating, and so that's what we're proposing with this scope and process, and I'll let Andrew and Tasha get to the details. Have been coming out of MAC, the Multiculturalism Advisory Committee, there had been an earlier report that had gone to council. Council had discussed this, I think it was late last year, or probably early last year, and there was direction to staff to prepare this report. So we're here today. It's I think it's a priority C on our 2017 business plan. So we're getting to it, and welcome your feedback today so we can bring that back for a more formal scope and process and actually kick off the project thereafter. So.
Thank you, Jim. For those who don't know, this is Tasha Henderson, social planner and community planning. Primarily focused on multiculturalism, is one of the staff liaisons for the MAC committee, and also takes up the torch of Welcome to Coquitlam last fall. So, welcome. So in 2015, the Multicultural Advisory Committee discussed the importance of cultural integration to community health. And they also talked about the importance of increased integration of newcomers to the community and celebrating our shared values as a community. At that time, MAC made a recommendation to Council that Council should direct staff to revisit the Multicultural Strategic Plan to better integrate the idea of cultural integration. And in 2016, Council did just that and asked staff to revisit the Multicultural Strategic Plan in order that it better reflect the importance of cultural integration in the community. So we're here today to talk a little bit about the proposed scope, what that update might look like, and a process for us to get there, and then we'll wrap up with next steps. But to take us through kind of the detail of the scope and process, I'm going to hand it over to Tasha.
Great. Thanks. Yeah. Hi, everyone. This one. So as Jim noted, the update is currently a C priority in our 2017 work plan. So looking at the other priorities that community planning has on the table this year, as well as the scope of the council motion that Andrew just spoke to, we're proposing a focused and strategic update of the MSP at this time. So following a similar approach to the development of the cultural display policy that recently happened, staff would do some background and foundational research and then engage with MAC committee members at key milestones along the way. And of course, building on Council's recent motion for staff to review the Tri-Cities Local Immigration Partnership strategic priorities, we would look at existing community partnerships to see where there may be opportunities for synergies and collaboration in terms of the plan's implementation. So thinking of the scope as a strategic and focused update, we're proposing a 3-step process to move it forward. So that process would look at taking us through the summer. Staff would conduct a scan of best practices and approaches that other communities and municipalities are taking around this issue and provide foundation for us moving forward. As I mentioned before, we would also look at what other agencies like the Local Immigration Partnership are doing in response to this need in the community and update MAC around what we find in that. So phase 2, going through the fall and winter, we would use those findings from phase 1 and work with MAC to define what cultural integration means for the Coquitlam context. And we brainstorm activities and actions that would fit into an updated MSP that focuses on cultural integration and update council at the end of the year on the progress we've made thus far. Phase 3, we would be welcoming a new MAC committee in 2018, though certainly some familiar faces would stay at the table, and we would work with MAC to complete the update and bring an updated MSP forward for Council's consideration in the new year. Down the road, should Council desire, they could consider prioritizing a more comprehensive update on a future business plan, and of course this could be informed by the work and findings that come out of this process.
So, thank you. Based on any of the discussion and feedback that we hear from Council today, staff will revise the proposed scope and process that's before you and then present it at an upcoming regular Council meeting for Council's consideration. And additionally, staff will continue to work with MAC on another one of their business plan items, which is their Cultural Understanding Project, which is about kind of thinking about what the vision of that Cultural Understanding Project might be, and how do we increase cultural understanding amongst Coquitlam residents and improve kind of the harmony between cultures. And with that, Council or MAC may consider future recommendations to Council. Thank you.
Okay, I have Councillor Reid, myself, and Councillor O'Neill. So start with Councillor Reid.
Well, reading through this and reading the minutes and that from the Multicultural Committee, I think we've got a pretty happy group there. I think they get their say. I think we have so many. I mean, I look at all the work Terry has done, Terry Towner, for the refugees that have come in, not on behalf of Council, but I think she's certainly done my share, plus everybody else's. You know, we do a lot. And I have to look and see what the mandate of a city council is. And I think in some ways it's to recognize all of these issues. But I don't know if we need to be doing and delving into this as much as we're doing. Now, here's where my concern comes from. If this were an ordinary year, I'd say go ahead, fill your boots. This isn't. We need action. I need action on the ground. I don't need planning worrying about multiculturalism right now. I need planning worry about how to get the buildings up, the affordable housing issues, the apartments, all of that stuff. I need the action items attended to. I don't know how much time this will take. And so my question would be, is there a project that the Multiculturalism Committee could do by themselves? Like you say, we need this, and, you know, give them. Don't just go and, this is the problem with all committees, when staff always goes and gives them all the stuff, and they go, oh yeah, next week we give them more stuff. They're a good group of people. They have their own little tentacles out within their communities. Maybe they can be more useful to us and free up staff time to do some of the stuff that I think that planning should be doing. I think we need to be planners, and I can't call this airy-fairy stuff because it isn't, but it's warm and fuzzy stuff, and that's good, but I really think we need to get back to the business of being a city and doing the things that we carry on with, especially for the rest of this year, to get through this year and get caught up on some of the stuff that I look at your furrowed brow and understand where you are. So I have concerns.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Maybe I can respond in part on that, and maybe the MAC chair or vice chair may want to speak from the MAC perspective. I haven't been at too many of the recent meetings on that, but I get good feedback. Fair enough, and we understand right now we're in the midst of considerable pressure in terms of processing development applications and building permits for construction, and we're working hard in that area. We haven't lost focus on that, and we will be reporting out to council very shortly on some of the processes and changes we're intending to do there to keep efficient and keep that moving. On this side of the house, the community planning division, so they have some high priority items too. Finishing the Coquitlam Lougheed neighborhood plan. Austin Heights is coming on in a big way. City Center we want to get into. There's always things happening in the Northeast. So it's an important area, but it's in relation to all the other projects, and I think that's why I think it's quite appropriate. It was identified as a priority C on the business plan. It's something that's nice to get to. We can move at it when we can, but we also need to recognize we have other higher priorities, A and B projects that we more closely focus on and drive forward. So it is a piece that we are helping move along. I think just if you look at some of the dates in the report and when this discussion started and when it went to committee and when it came to here, it's been a little bit of lapse, and that's just because we're just balancing that off against our other work. So we think it's important. We think something we can carry on with our social planning team that's being led by or supervised by Andrew. So we think we can deliver on what we're proposing here. If other priorities come up at some point, council wants to reassign priorities, that's always your prerogative. But also I think the suggestion of engaging MAC is a good one too, and maybe the chair or vice chair could speak to that.
Just do you want to on the engaging MAC part of this?
I think Terry's going to speak.
Well, I've got him on the list after me, but if you just want to respond to the engaging MAC as you raise that question.
Well, we have, MAC's very engaged in these issues, and this is one of the issues that they would like some help in engaging. And what this report really is, and I want to make it clear, this isn't a full update of the MSP. This is a focused area on one segment of it to refine it in this area. So what they've done here in the scope and process is they said, look, we don't have the workload for this, but what we're going to do is we're going to take this one issue, cultural integration, which I think is really crucially important as we go as a city, and focus in on that, work through MAC, because a lot of this, if you look through it, is to do some scanning of best practices, but really is to work with MAC on defining how they see cultural integration. So that's going to be where the work really comes from MAC on this. And so I don't see this taking a huge amount of staff time, and that's why they brought down this report and saying that in the future, after this focused area of integration, we'd be then coming back to council at a future date if council supports an update of the full multicultural strategic plan. So I think this is a very limited request on staff time at this time.
Good, thank you. I have myself next, and I had a couple of questions. One is, we always hear the A, B, C priorities. And I've never really sort of thought about when does a C. I always sort of thought the C priorities were the A's in waiting that we were going to get to in 2 or 3 years. But new A's seem to keep coming in all departments. I see the other general managers nodding. It's sort of, at what point do you start on a C priority, and how do you manage to work on the C's without delaying the A's and the B's that are deemed by council to be more important? And that may be one to hand over to Mr. Dumont.
Well, I do think it's a dynamic process, and there's always priorities that do come up over over time. So I think, checking in with council periodically about the priorities is the appropriate way to make sure we're getting at the work that council wants us to get to. With this specific item, as Jim says, he thinks he can get to it. C priorities are ones that we will put off if there's other things that do come up that are more pressing, but he's giving a commitment to council today that he can get to this, and he wants to do a focused and limited amount of work on it.
Okay, and I'm looking at the list of priorities, and your department is a busy department, and a lot of things that are going here, and I look at some of the other C priorities for your department, which is the City Centre Area Plan, the Coquitlam Centre Mall Master Plan, the Heritage Management Plan. That's one that I know that the Millardville Committee has been raising. Of course, that committee doesn't exist anymore, but they've been very active when we're asking for something, and we've been told what's a C priority, we'll get to it when time permits. So not only are we competing with A's and B's, but we're also competing with a lot of other C priorities, some of those that have been waiting for 5 years, and this is sort of tough to sort of say what's your priority, because to me these are all priorities, including the one we're talking about today.
Certainly, Mr. Chair, there's a lot on the to-do list there. We're blessed by having many challenges. And I think I referred to some of those in my opening remarks. We haven't lost sight of those other projects on there, a C priority rating, and we will get to them when we can get to them. We do have plans. There are discussions with the community planning group that as we move to completion, some major projects on the go right now. Coquitlam Lougheed, Northwest Burke. We're hoping the Austin Heights one can move forward in a focused, expedited fashion. We will then have an ability to redeploy those project teams to these other projects. So we're having those discussions right now. Andrew, Steve, and I talk about that sort of lining these things up. We don't want things to fall through the cracks, but we got to how we can move on with some of these other projects that are on the business plan, and how can they be reasonably tackled? Because at the end of the day, we don't want to be taking off more than we can chew, and we want to get through them and show some progress.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think that's why Councillor Reid had raised that, and I had the similar concern when I read this, particularly when I looked at our priority plans, and those are the ones I just listed were the C's. I mean, when you throw in the B's, which is Austin Heights Density, Fraser Mills, Northwest Burke, Riverview, Frontage Works Program, and Housing Choices, those are all significant pieces of work that, from what you're telling me, are actually in front of this. And I would be remiss if I didn't sort of say, and where are we with the heritage plan? It's maybe a topic of discussion again tonight, and we keep sort of saying it's a C priority, but I think there's an expectation within the cultural groups that that's going to be addressed as well, and I appreciate it's a challenge to manage the community's expectations, this council's expectations, and the word of Mr. Stedman, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So. Okay, I'll leave that with you and go to Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you very much. Before I heard my colleagues speak, I was going to say, and I won't retract this, I'm still going to say this, that I like the approach here. It's simplifying. It's not making a big elaborate rewrite. It's designed with a real attainable end goal in mind. And the fact that it's putting it back really for the MAC committee to do the work where they started. So the MAC committee is going to have to do it's the main feedback point where ideas will be developed here. It's not like staff will be going out and holding a series of open houses or something like this, or big public information meetings and things like that. The work is being done MAC, so it's integrated into the work that MAC is already doing, and 2 of the 3 staff members presenting today are at every MAC meeting, and so it just will roll into their work. So I think that's a very efficient way of doing it. I also wanted to say that the other thing I was going to say at the start was that the scan of best practices, it may well be that no other organization has really tackled this the way MAC wants to tackle it and that City Council wants to tackle it. And I would caution you to say, caution you not to conclude that their failure to tackle this is a best practice in itself. We may be developing the best practice here. So just if you don't find something that's good, don't say that the best of that mediocre lot is best practice, and that's something we should emulate. We could find something better. And I just wanted to reply to Councillor Reid's suggestion that there was a lot of work, and that's what Councillor Hodge said as well. There's so much important work that's bricks and mortar sort of work, and that has to be done. But at the same time, I know that yes, this is not a bricks and mortar thing, but just so many of the rezonings that we do, or the master plans that we do, or the neighborhood plans have elements in them that are not really hard bricks and mortar. They're about the feel of what we're developing, wanting to make sure that it's a livable space, wanting to make sure that there's enough parking and enough parks, those sorts of things that aren't really the bricks and mortar stuff of building new buildings and things. So I think this sort of thing is at least as important as some of the things I just suggested. Because we don't get on top of this and don't get ahead of it, I think there's a real possibility that the community becomes more fractionalized. We're doing a tremendous amount to bring our community together with the amenities we build, the plans that we're passing, putting in place to build really good communities. This is at a very important, very timely social development in our community. And we should get ahead of this. And I really thank the MAC committee for having the foresight to see that this is something that needs to be done. We've done so much to encourage and celebrate the multicultural aspect of our community. Now let's look, building on that, how we can, as Merrill said, looking at what are the shared values that we have, and how can we bring those people together. So I'm really happy that we're going to be doing this, and I will conclude my presentation by moving receipt of the report.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Hill, second by Councillor Asmundson. I believe I still have you on the list, so Councillor Asmundson.
Well, and I guess to me, I look at this a lot of times. It's more important than a C part, at least a B. You know, we're building a new city. The cultural makeup or the ethnic makeup of our city is changing rapidly, and to work in that social character, that social impact and change here, to have a city that's going to not delve into maybe separate enclaves or areas that are not connected to each other, or when you talk about social isolation, it's one of the issues we talk about a lot in here. So through the MAC committee and this cultural integration, we're trying to look at ways through the city can help lead in ways to help make sure that people, through our process, through our ways, and how do we better connect the people that are coming in here? Because it's not like it was 25, 30 years ago, because it was generally similar cultures coming in here. We got very, very diverse cultures coming in here. Now, Councillor Towner is working with a group of refugees, but refugees make up actually a very small portion of the immigrants that are coming here every day, all the time, with different cultural backgrounds, different understandings, difficulties in our community. And I think through the MAC and looking at cultural integration is one of the key areas that we really need to be ahead of and work at to make our city as a caring and a community that can get along as good as it can. And I think, you know, when we talk about building nice, I think, as brick and mortar buildings, high rises, when we're looking at good parks, well, that's really nice, and those are great amenities. But if you don't work on bringing people together to cooperate and get along with each other, those don't tend to work. And I think it's an area that is really crucial. And once again, as I said earlier, this isn't a rewrite of the MAC plan. This is not a huge work item. And as Mr. McIntyre said, a lot of reports, pretty soon we'll have the Northwest Burcott plan, we'll have the Coquitlam Lohi plan off, different things will fall off, and this is a C priority, so they are going to work on it as they get opportunities to work on it. But I think it's something that we shouldn't put off. We basically put it off for almost a year and a half right now. So I think it's been waiting a fair share of time to get onto it. And I think staff has come back to council knowing their limited time by suggesting this very focused area to look at to reduce the impact on staff time. Thank you.
Okay, Mayor Stewart.
I wanted to make sure we walk that line because there is a broad spectrum between customer service and making sure that our services as a community meet the needs of a broad range of people, whether they have disabilities, physical or mental disabilities, or they come from another place, or their cultural realities are different. To what extent does the city have a role to play in making sure that counter staff can help a wide variety of customers deal with their issues, and to what extent does that extend to integration services, the services aimed at integrating newcomers to our community and other communities? And I actually argue a little bit against the latter, because there are agencies that are funded for that, and agencies that are that is their goal, that is their raison d'etre, is to assist with the integration of newcomers in our community and other communities. In other words, that newcomer that moves, the refugee that moves from Cottonwood to Port Coquitlam, shouldn't lose all the services because they're not in Coquitlam anymore. No, obviously should be a regional or provincial or national funded service that follows them wherever they go. Their service from us ought to be aimed, I think, primarily at their integration or their contact with us, their involvement with us as an organization. That means making sure our senior centers integrate and appeal to a broad range of people and all those sorts of things. So I look through the plan as it sits now, and I'm not uncomfortable with the action items there, because there aren't any action items that relate to integration of people into our community. We want to be a very welcoming and inclusive community, but where's the line that we have to stop at as a community? And I would argue that there's lots of volunteer groups, task groups, there's lots of Mosaic and Success and the other organizations whose role it is and whose funding is aimed at helping integrate newcomers into our community. We should work with them. We should help coordinate that. We should participate on TCLIP and other bodies. We should make sure our library, the services that we do provide for residents, are aimed at all the residents and serve all the residents, and to the extent necessary that our stuff is in multiple languages and that our stuff is culturally sensitive as well, and then stop and leave the roles that others play in the hands of others that are best able to do that.
Okay, I have Councillor Marsden and then Zarrillo and Wilson. So,
thanks. I think you've done a good job of explaining with regards to the different departments within your department and roles they've got, and I think you certainly have the ability to manage the process, all the ongoing development and growth that we've got, and I wouldn't foresee you taking resources away from that to address this. This said, what this appears to be is a precursor to a revamp of the entire strategic plan. The strategic plan was done in 2011, so at some point in time it would make sense that it get updated. So the gist of this appears to be saying, let's take some time and do some research to essentially add an additional component to the existing strategic plan. And normally when you're going through a strategic planning exercise, you identify exactly what you're trying to do. You look at the entire piece, not just presuppose that this should be part of it. And I think that's what we're doing here, is we're presupposing that the cultural integration should be yet another piece of the strategic plan as it currently exists. But when I look at this, and in the 5 goals that we've got in attachment 3, goals 3, 4, and 5, one could suggest that cultural integration is in these pieces. So the need to fully dive into and do a review of the strategic plan to add this, I think you've already got it within the plan. And so it's just a matter of saying what specific action items could that be done. So instead of taking the time to do more planning as a precursor to an overall plan review, I think it makes more sense for us to take this away, look and say what specific action items could we look to do that would achieve exactly what the Multicultural Advisory Committee is trying to achieve without spending the planning exercise. Spend the time on actions and things that we can move forward to achieve their objectives right now versus running back. So I'd really encourage us to take this back and say, you know what, how do goals 3, 4, and 5? 3 speaks to, in partnership with the community, raise awareness, understanding, appreciation of multicultural, and increase community's capacity to be welcoming and inclusive. Okay, so if you start to increase the capacity, then you can start to work with it. Goal 4, partnership city will encourage civic engagement and participation in culturally diverse population by increasing awareness and understanding the city's roles, functions, and services. Again, that's speaking to some integration. And the 5th one, partnership city will support the participation and belonging of Coquitlam's culturally diverse populations by developing and or promoting programs, services, and resources. So that, to me, those 3 goals themselves, we'd be able to make enough connection that under the leadership of our chair and vice chair, I think the committee could look and say, what specific actions could we take? So instead of saying, what are other cities doing? Let's look and say, what do we want to do? Because to the point that was made, we may find that there's nobody else out there that's really doing this or has grasped it, because we do have an incredibly diverse community. So I appreciate what's gone into this point. I would support the piece where it says, you know what, maybe in 18 or 19 we look at a full revitalization of the plan. I think that makes some sense. But in the interim, as opposed to adding in this other piece, I would say, let's look to say how we can create some immediate actions to achieve what the committee wants, as opposed to the planning exercise that it appears to be. Thanks.
Okay, I've got Councillor Cirillo next.
I think I said it a few weeks back. This looks like a really fun committee. It looks like they're doing a lot of fun stuff. So I do like the ideas and the thought behind it. I'm kind of where Mayor Stewart is. I made a note that we do have a lot of partners in the community, and we talk about it in our affordable housing strategy that we should, within our limited scope, we need to rely on our partners. So I definitely am interested in exploring that, where the link is for the partners. And also, if we do anything going forward, I would certainly want to see some sort of measurements of success. If there's a lot of staff time to put behind this, and even community time, it would be good to have a definition of what success. So I know we haven't already defined what this multicultural integration is, so we're not even exactly sure where it's going to be, but I wanted to just have a shout out for Parks and Rec right now. Parks and Rec is working, and city communication as well, on people getting connected. So I think that's an incredible initiative. I have some tentative thoughts about how this could be a push-pull there, where we're trying to be inclusive and all connective at the global level of the city, and then we would have a separate entity that might be operating differently. So our striving for inclusion might actually end up being some exclusion, because really the city is working on integrating our community centers and our facilities together to be accessible for everyone, to not be labeling, but to making everything more accessible. And I also do think about fairness. One of the value statements of the city is about fairness, and I think that people with disabilities and people that are blind or have limited physical capabilities or have barriers that come along with mental health issues, they're just as important to integrate as a visible characteristic or cultural characteristic. So I would hate to see the seniors be left out because we're too busy focusing how to integrate these groups. And my last point would be that about the best practices. I came from Montreal. When I came to Coquitlam, it was not as diverse as Montreal. I lived in Toronto. I had my daughter in school in Toronto. Not as diverse. The school district, not as diverse. I think that there's a lot of work that's been done out there, and there probably are best practices that we can get on the back of. And it made me think that we should probably have a school board rep on MAC, if we don't, that has the international program. So those are my comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
So I guess I would be interested in hearing from Andrew or Tasha what you think of the last two suggestions in particular, right? Because it's sort of like maybe we have the capability to address some of the goals of redoing the plan already. I was just reading the Vancouver Sun this morning, and they were talking about how Canada is going to be the fastest growing. Canada is experiencing the fastest rate of ethnic change of any country in the Western world. Yep. Almost 7 of 10 Metro Vancouver residents will be visible minorities or non-whites in less than 2 decades. And so it's a huge, huge issue.
Yep.
I agree with what Mayor Stewart said about, there's other groups out there. I guess my concern is, well, what if the other groups are not, doing the job? What if they're not coordinated with each other? Maybe that's a role the city could play. So, I think there is a definite role for the city to play. I don't know exactly the role, but I'd be interested in hearing what you thought of, especially what Dennis was saying in terms of the goals and objectives. Is that okay, Craig? Let's wait.
Yep. Sure. Okay, just wait. Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bill.
Sure. Through the chair to Councillor Wilson. All of the existing action items from the existing 2011 MSP are either completed or fully integrated into existing city processes. So right now we're not actively working on any of those action items because they're either completed or they're just part of normal business practice. So the only way we could further advance those goals would be to introduce new action items, which is part of the proposal here today, would be to do a focused update to add a couple of action items specifically around cultural integration into the existing MSP.
That aren't already captured in some of the objectives that we have
under the existing goals and objectives, but actual specific action items.
I think it's always a good thing to look at what other areas are doing, and I like it when we look outside the Lower Mainland as well. And so I'm in favor of a scan of what other best practices are out there for sure. But I agree with some of the concerns that have been raised about our capacity to do the work and that sort of thing. So. I have not helped the issue at all in my comments here. I was trying to understand it a bit more and see where you're coming from. But
Councillor Towner.
I may be like Councillor Wilson. I don't know how helpful I'm going to be, but I read the report twice, and both times, I'm very enthusiastic about this whole concept of welcoming newcomers and having a community that's everything that's here, right? It's a passion of mine. However, I had the same concerns as Councillor Reid about workload and C priority and how do we get to it. And then the partner groups, the mandate, where do we draw the line? So one thing, my own experience with the task group for the refugees, is we initially formed it just to do sort of the softer stuff, make sure these people feel welcome in Coquitlam, and get them to the festivals and they're aware of where the parks are and library cards and women's only swims and sort of having friendships and mentors and all that kind of softer stuff. But the more we worked with them, we had to constantly, we kind of go over into the area of employment and language training and housing and have to keep that struggle. What's our mandate? And so I think it's really important that there are the service industries agencies out there that they're funded to do, and having a good relationship with them and keeping on attending the TCLIP and all the other conferences and forums out there to stay dialed in. So I'm not really offering anything either except sharing my thoughts. I'm like a lot of my colleagues here, I think this is wonderful. And I campaigned on a city is more than just roads and pipes and infrastructure. It's the people. It's the people in your city that make your city what it is. So that's very important. And all of this softer stuff is very important. And I think we're doing a really good job. But also being at 2017 and with the issues with planning, the mortar stuff, bricks and mortar, I don't know. So there's my spiel.
Okay, Mr. McIntyre, I'm trying to figure out exactly where we are, because I'm seeing about a 50-50 split on this here.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. No, we get it. Well, first, some helpful comments there. We'll take it back. And that's, again, the purpose of today was to lay out a proposed approach. try to answer any questions and get council's feedback on that, so we can sharpen this up, and we'll bring it back to council for formal consideration of endorsement to give us the green light to proceed, if that's the decision then. We also get it in terms of what's the mandate? What's the city's mandate? And I have to confess, as a city planner, I wrestle with this all the time. In my department, I've got 3/4 of staff are doing development, 1/4 doing this. I got 1.5 social planners. So I think that sort of puts it in perspective. But you look at what the municipality's role and responsibility in these areas are. And we wrestle with that through the housing affordability discussion. A lot of it was around just what exactly is Coquitlam's role in that. And I think in the end we came to a good understanding and a good sort of consensus on that. It's not for the city to become a housing authority. We're there in partnership. We work within our limited means, both financial and legislative. And I think it applies in this area too. I think some of the points that the chair and vice chair of MAC made, because they have that ongoing contact and dialogue with them. We're not just building a community of high rises and new roads and transit and parks and It's people too. And is the whole chemistry of how that community works. And so this is important in that. So the city does have a role, I believe, but it has to be in proportion to other agencies. The mayor made good points. Senior levels of government have these responsibilities. They have the funding. We shouldn't be crowding them off. We're always looking out for downloading, but sometimes we find ourselves edging into their areas of responsibility as well. So we'll take those points away. I think there is something here. We got a good multiculturalism strategic plan right now. It's a focused review we want to do. I like Councillor Morrison's suggestion, maybe some real tangible action items, getting more to what we're looking at here in terms of cultural integration. And so we'll try to work that into a little bit of a massage work program and bring it back to council here within the next month or so. And thank you for your feedback today.
No, and that was going to be one of my questions, but I'll just, before I wrap up, I'll go to Councillor Asmundson.
Well, I guess one of the issues when we came to the MAC committee and we were talking about our MSP plan is most of the goals and objectives within the MSP have been accomplished. And so the committee was struggling, well, what else do we need to really take on now that most of these items from the original plan have been done? And the consensus was, and it's a diverse issue, an issue that needs more defined, and the MAC is going to work on that, but is this cultural integration? And so it's an issue that the committee said, well, if we've done so much of this already, what we've done, this is the next issue we think is the most important issue to start the city to go down this road and look at. And we felt that, the committee felt that to look at this issue prior to the MSP would help inform some of the directions of the MSP in the future. And so that's where this, from the committee's mandate came out, was about, because the committee asked, where are we at? What have we done on the MSP? And came back, well, we pretty much done everything that we stayed out in the original plan. And so that's why this was selected as one of the tangible items and goals that the committee wanted to look at and work on. And it does always, like any committee, whether it's the sports committee, the environment committee, the cultural committee, or anything, there's a bit of staff time in supporting those works. This is no different than anyone else, this committee, and having some extra work done on those priorities within those committees. And that's what this is asking for in a more direct and way to council on this one issue, because it's a big issue. It really is. And we need the committee's help with the city to define what that really means, that word, and how we move forward in the community and how the community take forward of that. So that's what I wanted to say.
Councillor Cirillo.
Well, just in follow-up to that, it brings the question. So then I guess I didn't understand fully. So it looks like the work of the committee is wrapped, that the work of the committee, and they're now looking for something else to do. Like I don't think that's true, right? Like there's still lots of work that's being pushed down from the city to this committee, correct? Okay, yeah. Because I'm sorry, what I heard is they're looking for what they're going to do next.
On that plan, percent exact, on the plan, on what's called strategy.
Yeah, okay.
Just on the plan.
Yeah, and I think what I'm saying is,
so that plan is not all the work of the committee. There's still lots of work for the committee to do outside, even if there is no update to the plan. Correct. There's still plenty of work for the. Okay.
No, I don't think anyone would suggest to wrap up the committee. So the recommendation before us is to receive the report, and that's moved and seconded. We heard some discussion about immediate actions. And I think there was probably support for that amongst everybody, that we all want to see some action and stuff. So I think the question comes is beyond immediate action, where does staff see this going? Because to receive a report, it sort of leaves it sort of open to where you want to go with it. And I think maybe we just need before we vote, I think maybe some of council would said a little bit more of what your takeaways and where your direction is, just to make sure we're all on the same page before we send this off to back to staff.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. As I said, I think what we'd like to do is we'll go back and reflect on what we've heard today. We will tweak up this report and the work program, getting some of the specifics that have been discussed. We'll be mindful of the amount of staff resources that are directed at this relative to the other needs and projects in the department. And we'll bring something back that to council that you can see then a prescribed proposed work program, and that they give council the ability to wade in on that and ultimately to consider that for endorsement, which would then give us the green light to get going. I can see that may take a month and a half or so. I'll have to check with Andrew and Tasha, because there are a number of other projects obviously underway right now. But no, as I said before, we get it. It's a difficult area sometimes. You venture into this, and so how deep you get in, and we're careful about that.
Thank you. We appreciate the importance of this, and also recognize the important work your department is doing. So thank you for this report. And
so sorry, just for, what about French? Is French part of this? Is our French part of the connection that we're talking about, the French community, or is this all have to do with new?
Multicultural includes the French. I thought that was sort of when the Mayardville committee wrapped up, that we were sort of splitting that between this committee and economic development, and that, so that should be covered in here.
It covers every group.
Yeah. Mr. McIntyre, maybe you'd like to clarify that. Councillor Cirillo.
A good reminder, that was one of the original multicultural groups. That's true. We typically get more focused on where the current multicultural trends and themes. But there was discussion around that recently, and there was some direction given to staff, I recall, and so we are also looking at that as well, and be coming back to council in time with some ideas how that can be tackled and realized.
Okay, good. Okay, it is before us. It is to receive the report. Staff has sort of given us a little bit more clarification, so I think we can move ahead. It's been moved, it's been seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Cirillo is opposed, and that concludes that item. Thank you.
To the correct item, it's item 4, the asset replacement assessment, park infrastructure. We have introductory comments by the GM Parks and Culture Services. The report is before you for information.
Okay, second, moved by Councillor Reid, second by Councillor Cirillo. I think we've got a presentation, so I'll turn it over to staff to
thank you, Mr. Chair. I just some opening comments. Really, Phil Hebner's with me here, manager of park infrastructure. Kathleen Ranheimer is also here to answer any questions you might have specific to the project. As you council knows, we brought forward a report a few months ago. We've really now finally clarified the total kind of asset inventory for parks, all the infrastructure we have, and including a little bit of backlog in there. The only few points I want to make was, first of all, this is one of those quadrants, and over the previous budget cycles, I remember putting up a slide with a number of quadrants, funding quadrants, new facilities, new parks. One of them was park infrastructure, an area that we needed to kind of get our information together, and for our department, so this does that for us and for the city to start making more strategic financial decisions in the long term for funding the asset replacement of our entire inventory. The other part is really our current approach, which is really doing a citywide, and we're working with finance, who's really helping us as well as the other departments that have assets, and so there will be some work that will be coming forward in a few months, which collectively brings all of these together and allows council to make larger decisions decisions, more coordinated decisions on all the park infrastructure replacement program. And you'll note that my final point, the current funding provided by council for park infrastructure there's two components to that. The sports fields, which is $775,000 a year, and then there's the park asset maintenance program, which is about $480,000. If you look at the amount that's currently funded for sports fields, and what we're looking at right now, as council knows, one of our priority projects is the sports field turf sustainability funding, which is the idea is that the users will actually do some of that funding, and the idea is to bridge some of these gaps over time with additional funding sources that give us some reliable user fee funding for the replacement, in particular turf fields that require a much greater number of investment. Because they have to be replaced every 10 years or so. With that, I will put it on the table for council, and our staff will be available to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, I've got Councillor Reid, myself, Councillor O'Neill, and then pretty much everybody. Go ahead, Councillor Reid.
Okay, so looking at this, I don't think that the general public realizes how much money, how many millions and millions of dollars we have in infrastructure and assets in the parks. But my question has to do with the parks that are attached to schools that we have traditionally, either built them and maintained them, or we build, they maintain. Has that all been? You say you're 80% complete the condition assessment. Is that allocated between both of us, or are we talking with the school board to see who's going to take on what, or how we're going to deal with this?
All of the assets in city lands is part of the inventory. There are cases where the school district has received funding from the city to put a playground on there, and that is not included in here. That is separate. That is part of that becomes a school district asset. With us, to general understanding, they'll maintain those historically.
So every time we take casino funds, which we have done over the past years, and tried to upgrade all our schools. Those particular swings, and I know they're not teeter-totters anymore, but the swings, etc., as soon as we put them up on the schools, they're a school board property. And who maintains them then? The school board?
The school district. And now, if I can, Mr. Chair, it's complicated. I just want to say it's not black and white. We've got some joint use sites that have, some agreements, like Smiling Creek, for instance. We've done the field. They'll do the internal community space. They're required to maintain the playgrounds, and they're required to maintain the parking lot. So the newer agreements have a little bit more robustness in that. But a lot of the historical ones was simply a grant to a PAC, largely, and then the PACs generally work with the school district. But yes, there's always the concern of whether they maintain it at the same level as we would. We certainly try and compel them to do that, but it's not always across the board.
Great difficulty making PACs go out and raise funds for things that should be there. So I guess we talked a while ago about discussing with the school board things that we would do and share and get that list down and consolidate it into sort of, shall we say, the new age. And I would like to see that done in conjunction with this, because I think I'd like to start, if we're going to start on a process like this, I would like to know who has what and whose responsibility to do what, especially with respect to the maintenance, because our maintenance standards are different. And I would like to have an updated plan. Thank you.
Okay. And my question is, how does asset replacement differ from maintenance? And I'm thinking some of the bigger things. At which point, when you have to resurface a tennis court or a parking lot, is that an asset replacement, or is that a maintenance issue? I'm just sort of wondering how you define the difference between, and that may not be an easy one to define. Or
I'll say 3 words, and then Phil can jump in.
Over to you,
patching things up, painting and some patchwork is included in what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Replacement is not. So maybe Phil can add a little bit of color to its various types of infrastructure.
Yeah, so we do professional condition assessments The type of assessment, the level of detail varies for each type of asset. And it's no different than your automobile or a piece of furniture in your house. It wears over time. You do it, you clean it, you maintain it, but at some point you project when you're going to have to replace it. You try to budget for it. Of course, all of us budget to replace that new car or that old car. And that's the nature of it. It's just maintenance over the projected lifespan, whether it be 20, 25, or 30 years, and educated planning as to when you replace the asset. So there's a distinct difference.
Right. So this report, and reading through it, it suggests that we have gotten behind and that there's some immediate needs. And this is really, and I think in here it even refers to the theoretical exercise of sustainability. So this is really leading up to a budget request that we need. And we've had this discussion about asset replacement. You know, if you have X amount of value, whether it's in buildings or trucks or whatever it is, you should be putting a certain amount aside each year for replacement, which is something that's not easy to do, particularly when you're struggling with meeting the needs of today's residents. So I worry that we're looking at just, setting up another reserve fund versus spending the money to fix the stuff that's broken. I note that we have $480,000 per year for maintenance, but with this report, we could be talking putting $2 million down for replace. So maybe you can just clarify that for me.
Yes, and by putting aside the money for that new car, he means use financing. That's what he means. That's what I mean. Sorry, tongue in cheek, but the $480,000 actually is not maintenance. That's actually asset replacement money that council funds through the gas tax and general revenue. So that's not maintenance, that's actual replacement. So let's separate maintenance from full replacement. The money that council gives us is $775 for replacing sports field and $480 to replace tennis courts, park infrastructure, etc. The rest of it is technically built into operating type to capital, but that's very, very little. That's a little bit of a paint job, it's a couple more screws, it's replacing a couple boards on a fence, and I'm minimizing this just for understanding. The theoretical amount, and yes, you're correct in that part of understanding what we have and what we in our compound that is the city is knowing all of the assets that you own and what's the value of them and what decisions you need to make to replace them over time. And you can take various strategies, but we don't want to do it alone because engineering has assets, facilities has assets. So the idea is that finance will come forward with the aid of all three departments and other departments that have assets and say, look, this is what we really own. Clearly, it's impossible to fund, it would be impossible to fund what you need to fund on an average amount. Plus, we'd never have the resources technically to do what we need to do if we need to do the backlog. The idea is to get a full picture and then begin to make some better funding decisions over time. We clearly try and draw out the life of an asset. We know the work that Phil and Kathleen have done with the consultant is very, very specific. They've really tried to draw out, a field isn't just 20 years for a sports field, a grass field. It's actually the components themselves can actually last 30 years. So let's be more specific. We don't want to put up a huge number. So a lot of it is a little bit theory. Yes, finance will come forward for the entire city to talk about, hey, the reality is we do have a lot of inventory in the city and we have to have some general sense of what needs to be funded to replace the highest level of priorities, and on an annual basis we'll have to figure out what that might be, and it just draws out the replacement of other assets.
And I'm going to move on. I just want to reiterate that one of the concerns is that the people, we get the emails about the tennis court and the parking lot and the things that need to be fixed, and clearly we have a deficit or a backlog and we may have to consider something like the park blitz where we just have to say, look at and I note in your report you said even if we put the money there today, you don't have the resources to do the work. So we may have to look at a 4-year catch-up program or something, and that may be something that comes from this discussion. So I'm going to go on to Councillor O'Neill and then Councillor Marston.
Thanks very much. I'm glad you got a statement of Mr. Alweva just a minute ago, because to me this was about seeing where the optimal funding is and realizing that somewhere in between optimal funding and deterioration and obsolescence is where we want to be.
Yes.
Right? We don't want to go down that slippery slope so the deterioration is so bad that it gets obsolete and then all of a sudden we don't have any money to replace it and then we start losing services. So, in one way, yes, save us from optimal funding, like save the taxpayer from optimal funding, because that gets, it's only in, seems to be only in governments that they think about, here's so many private enterprises, they cut things really close and they have to, they've got to take into account a lot of different things. We've got this source of money that, we can just, by going like this, raise the taxes, or going like this, have this new fee. So, it's kind of too easy for us sometimes.
Yeah.
So I'm certainly glad that the general manager recognized that optimal funding is not where we're going to be, but it's good to know what that is, so we know, so we can put it, so we can bounce that off with what I call deterioration and obsolescence, somewhere in the middle. Right. So I'm happy with that. So good report in that sense, and I did talk to you about my little concern about your report. You made me go back and forth 3 or 4 times because you introduced the acronym AATI, and did I miss it? In fact, I miss it. And you didn't actually spell it out to page 4.
I was just wondering which council member was paying attention.
We were paying attention, and you made us work a little harder to figure out what AATI
Apologies.
was.
I think we moved a part of the report to the back, and that's what occurred. If we had it defined earlier. Thank you for picking that up. I apologize.
I know. You're thinking of your own efficiency without our efficiency in reading, but anyway, we just...
Thank you. Thank you.
We all had fun trying to figure it out. It made it easier to read the report when I got to the back. I was able to double back to the front and then fill in the blanks.
Yeah,
it's like the RCMP report.
I was going to actually, just on that point, I was going to suggest that when we're using a lot of abbreviations, it's almost worth putting an index at the end.
Yes,
so
I know.
You can so you can quickly just flip back to find it. I've taken to highlighting the first time it's used, but there was a lot of work from the staff to put that together. I have Councillor Marsden and then Councillor Espenson.
Very quickly, I'll echo the comments from Councillor O'Neill with regards to your recognition that while there is a number that you think we'd like to have, it's realistic and we don't have the resources to actually deliver on that regardless. So it's a matter of coming out that balance. And the other piece, you spoke about facilities and you spoke about engineering. And so through our deputy city manager and through to finance, I think what I would like to see as we come into the budget discussions this year is this exact information put very, very clearly, very concisely. This is what Parks and Recs feels they need. This is what engineering feels they need, and this is what strategic initiatives feels they need to move forward. Put it all out there so everybody can see it, so we can see it, so the residents can see it, and I think in many cases it's easy to say yes to the park stuff because it's so visible. And unfortunately, in many cases, the stuff that's really needed is the stuff that's underground, it's invisible, and only our engineers know for sure. And they try to explain it to us in English. So my request is very simple: is let's make sure we've got something from parks, something from engineering, from strategic initiatives for our facilities. And if there's any other departments that come up where we know there's a significant number, I know we've heard from fire in the past that there's a bit of a shortfall in terms of some funding on some of the pieces they have, but when we start dealing in shortfalls of 6 and 7 figures on an annual basis, then I really think that needs to be brought to attention. So I'd ask for a report on that, or at least be included in the budget discussions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Aspenson.
Well, I'm one of the people who's quite happy, who's been calling for this for a while, and I'm quite happy to see this report here. And I understand the optimal funding, and we're not going to be looking at the optimal, but what's the realistic needed funding. And really, when I look at the funding, it's not a reserve. This is what's required on a yearly basis, I think what you're saying in the report, to do the proper maintenance of all the assets that are there on a yearly basis and where we're short from that. When we have a park blitz that we're doing right now, it's more of a Band-Aid on a problem that we're not dealing with. So I think this report now has come forward to show us the problem of what we're not dealing with. But I want to make sure that we're not talking about a reserve here. This is talking about what we're going to need on a yearly basis and how we get to that yearly basis of that proper funding. And then we're going to have to look in the future to see, as we add more assets in, adjust that. And then there's going to be an inflation factor as we move along every year to readjust, because cost of replacement pieces are going to go up from these are 2017 estimates right now. They're going to change as we move forward. But I'm I'm glad this is coming forward. I think there's still some more refinement that you're going to be doing on this as it comes back from finance. And I guess the other question I always want to find out and ask is that this is asset replacement, but it also comes into maintenance part of it also. So if we, on the other flip side, if we better maintain our assets and properly fund the maintenance of our assets, or will we get better life out of them? So I think that's the other part I want to see in this report coming back is what's the deficiency in our maintenance of that fund, and does that reduce the number of years of that asset that we could get out of that asset? So I think there's two parts here that need to be understood, just not the asset, the money for asset replacement, but also what is the shortfall in funding on the ongoing maintenance. And if we get that right, we can then extend our life out of certain facilities and actually save us money in the long run. So I'd hope to see that. Those are my points.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Zarillo.
This is reminding me of the Nessie chart. I know it's a smaller scale,
Yes.
but it's kind of your Nessie. And that's, somebody asked me a few months ago, what keeps you up at night? That flipping Nessie chart. And this is basically that. So thank you for doing it. And I'm not concerned to see the real numbers at budget time. And I mean, we have to make a hard decision. We should make those hard decisions at the council table. So I'm happy with that. The most shocking statement to me was the 52% of Coquitlam playgrounds will be due for replacement over the next 10 years. That's a pretty short window. We have a lot of new tax folios coming in our city regularly. We should be able to do that now. So I also, the like for like, that's really unfortunate. We saw the wonder of Como Lake Park when we decided to just up it a little bit. I mean, it went from here to here on a very small increase, so I'm concerned about the like for like. So let me know what you need, and we'll have to make the hard decisions. So the second thing I wanted to just mention was at the farmers market on the weekend, and Shiloh Park came up a few times. I guess Shiloh Park is looking wonderful, and the hedges are down, and the kids are using it. So one of the asks that came, and Mr. Giozecchi, I actually reached out to engineering this morning, and I know this isn't parks, but it's for parks and engineering to work together. When we have new life in a park like that, we're getting way more traffic. So I think there needs to, I guess the crosswalk needs a repaint on Irvine, and maybe just some, I know when we get a new sign, we have new and people notice it, but maybe just a new, again, that this is a playground zone, and some speed signs. And I think that's not just for Shiloh, but even for Rochester Park, packed all the time now. If we could just remind people it's a playground zone and to slow down. So if I could ask that when we do upgrade these parks, if we just do the engineering on the outside to see if we need to re-identify it to slow down and a crosswalk. Because kids are using these like crazy now that they're looking so good.
Great.
Thank you for that. Oh, and I also want to mention, I did get an email last week about Noons Creek. It's not here till 2020. I'm not sure it can wait that long. I don't know if there's any play here, but it's looking pretty rough over there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This report, I believe, was moved and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Great work. Good work. Thank you. Great work.
Thanks, John.
Moving on to other business. OB1 is election donation restrictions and was raised by Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you very much. Get right to the point. I'm proposing that the mayor, on behalf of City Council, write a letter to the three leaders of the provincial parties who represent the legislature, alerting them to the fact that a lot of the discussion regarding campaign donations, election campaign donations, has centered on limiting union and corporate donations or eliminating them entirely. And what I'd like the city to point out is that, and indeed, Councillor Zarilla wrote a letter to the editor right after the election saying that she wants that to happen and make sure it gets happened, make sure it gets something about it gets imposed at the municipal level as well as the provincial level. Well, I would like us to send a letter to the three leaders saying that they'd be very careful and be very wary of unintended consequences of limiting such donations at municipal level. I think we all know that the importance of, well, actually, here, I'll back up a bit. I've made 2 submissions to the provincial government when they've asked for public input on this very contentious issue, pointing out that restrictions or elimination of union and corporate donations would have the unintended consequence of severely handicapping non-affiliated candidates and candidates who, new candidates who are just coming into it for the first time at the municipal level, and would tip the scales in favor of candidates who are political parties or who are parties that have close relationships with organizations such as labor unions, let's say, that provide volunteers and lists of people who can have letters sent to them. This is something that I think is, for anybody who's run in a provincial election, a civic election, knows to be the case. And I, in the last municipal election, I know that we heard very loud and clear that the city of Coquitlam, the voters in Coquitlam, don't want slate politics, don't want party politics. They like the independents. And I'm afraid that if the municipal restrictions ensue from whatever the provincial government does, and by the way, they just had a press conference that the Green Party will be working with the NDP party over the coming years. So the picture is crystallizing a little more what's going to happen. And both of those parties campaigned pretty heavily to eliminate corporate and union donations and at the provincial level. And I'm afraid that will reach the municipal level and have some real unintended consequences. So with the committee's backing, we can perhaps ask the mayor to write a letter just pointing out some of the consequences of what such restriction would have at the municipal level.
Okay, I've got Councillor Reid and then myself on the list, and then Councillor Cirillo.
Well, this goes back 25 years or more, and it's really hard to, when I first ran, it was when 2 people had quit to both run for the mayor's job, so there was 2 seats, and Bill Leclerc and I at that time happened to get in. But when you're brand new, you don't have a lot of corporate donations. You sort of rely on donations from business, small business, and whoever else will help you out. I've learned through the years that there is a price to lists, and I guess that's on, I'll call them 2 parties or 2 different tribes. One tribe has a list because there's memberships and ongoing communication and that, and the other one has a list because there's ongoing communication. But those who don't want to belong to either one, who are sort of an independent, run on your own, that's a little difficult because you don't have anyone to help you. And although you can be a member of a party, you don't necessarily agree with everything that they do. And some of us, and I look around the table and I see some of us that just go around, even though we're with one party or the other or with no one, we sort of go issue by issue and do our thing. And that's what I think most people on civic council should do. We're here for the people. We're not here to promote any one tribe over the other tribe, so to speak. We're here to listen to the people and deal with their issues. So I have always thought that the best way to make this a fairer thing is you can say no campaign, no union, no dollars coming in from anywhere. But the fairest way would be to just put a cap on what a person in any given jurisdiction could spend. And they can raise it from their grandpa, their grandma, their union, their businesses, wherever they want to raise it. But each and every candidate would only have X number of dollars to deal with. I think the province, and through the UBCM, we've had this conversation many times. I think campaign limits at the municipal level are the fairest way to go about it. And that means third-party advertising and all that stuff has to be taken into consideration too. So I notice a lot of us around here had a $30,000 number, $25,000, $20,000, wherever you are. But if you have a city of 140,000, maybe it would be 20 or 25,000. If you had a citizen group of 5,000 or 10,000 and under, it would be a smaller number. And I just think that's probably the fairest way. Then everyone could compete and have to compete fairly. And I would really like to bring this up and talk about it at UBCM again. Thank you.
Just before we
go back to Councillor Neal.
The issue is...
Hang on, point of order. Who's got the floor?
Okay, yeah, I think I'll let Councillor Neal, because he raised this, I'll let him clarify it.
The issue is, do you want the mayor to write a letter on behalf of council urging caution in banning corporate union donations?
That's your request.
At the municipal level?
At the municipal level. At the municipal level.
Okay, so we'll try to keep the discussion...
consequences, that's all.
That's fine. Okay, so we'll try to keep the discussion to whether or not to send a letter and what the reason would be based on. I've got myself on the list. Okay,
Me.
all right.
My point in all of this, you said write a letter. I said I agree with it, and I'd like to see it at UBCM again, but I'd also like to offer a solution. I hate it when people say just do one thing, because let's give a solution or a possible solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I have myself next on the list. My concern is that I would like to, if we're going to send a letter, I think that we have to look for solutions. And Councillor O'Neill said, beware of unintended consequences. My concern, and we had quite a discussion after the last election, and I had people talk to me about it. And I said, if you take this form of fundraising out of municipal elections, what is the replacement funding? And you know, through those discussions that took place afterwards, there was no identified funding, whether it's a total limit, whether the candidates fund it, where does the money come from? And I said to people, where does the money come from? He says, well, the people. Well, of course, at the civic election, you don't get tax receipts like you do at the provincial and federal elections. So I think you then have to look at making that change. So I think that if the provincial parties want to go, and I'm not saying I'm against banning it, I'm just saying in the absence of this, how would you fund a $15,000 campaign, which is about what it takes to run in this city? And if you were to say, well, you can go out and seek donations at $100 a piece, you would need 150 people to come up with $100 for your campaign. I didn't look at this, but I remember 3 years ago, looking at this, going through everybody's list, and I think I identified 50 individuals between about 9 candidates, a total of 50 people that actually stepped up and made a donation of about $100. You would each need 150 yourself, and I know candidates that struggle to find 150 people to take a lawn sign, let alone make that kind of a contribution. So I think if this discussion is going to happen, I think it has to be, what is the alternative? Rather than just to say we're going to do this ban, you have to either say it's a limit, or you have to say how will you allow it. Because I agree with Councillor O'Neill that in cities where there are independent candidates, you know, in the Tri-Cities, I think you can pretty much say most in this area were independent candidates. How would you then finance or run campaigns? And I think that's what you were saying about unintended consequences. So the discussion that happened in the provincial election was, I think, very high level. It was a position, but I think before this goes any further, I think the question has to be asked is, what is the alternative, and how would you bring this ban in, and what would you do? So that would be my point. I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm just saying is that if we're going to write the letter, we should point out that alternatives need to be presented. Okay. I've got Benita, Councillor Cirillo, and then I've got Councillor Asmussen.
Well, of course, I wouldn't support sending a letter. I was elected to represent people, not myself or other elected officials, and 80% of British Columbians don't want this, so I'm not going to say that I know better than 80% of British Columbians, but I do know that the elections aren't fair. I've been through 2 of them. They're not fair. All of us have been behind the scenes. All of us know the shenanigans that go on. The number one thing is incumbency. It's very hard to get an incumbency out, whether you use election donations or not. So I'm going to put that aside. I wanted to just say that it is well known and well documented by social psychologists that there is a law of reciprocity. May have said it wrong, but that's what it is.
It basically says that when someone does something nice for you, you will have deep-rooted psychological urge to do something nice in return. As a matter of fact, you may even reciprocate with a gesture far more generous than your original deed. So I know we can have an ideological discussion until the cows come home, but there is a law out there. It's a universal law that if you give someone something, you have a psychological urge, draw, to respond to that, whether you are conscious of it or not. And people know it. And that's why there is so much distrust with us politicians. And when I listen to this conversation around the table, how we've all started treading water to keep ourselves from not being unelected, I can see where people are coming from. So, of course, I won't support it. And I think that it's the people's will, not councillors that are elected, that want to keep their power.
Okay. Councillor Asmussen.
Well, thank you. And Craig, I want to thank you for some of the comments you made about if it was, where do we go from here? But I think the whole issue about this in the unintended consequence talked about influence, the influence of money in elections. But there's one other part that has to be brought into this because it's another form of influence that is not talked about in banning. And I really believe that you should get into banning membership lists. Mm-hmm. Membership lists within a union particularly are an advantage over candidates that are vetted and supported by unions because they have a machine that will support them, send out as May mentioned, a approved list to all their people, which creates an advantage. And that list are being vetted by unions to be supported by them is a form of influence over those candidates who go through it and has to be recognized. So I think within our letter we have to talk about, we're talking about influence within an election, our concerns about influence within an election. You have to talk about just not money from unions and corporations, but you have to talk about membership lists and the influence those membership lists have across this whole spectrum. And if you ban the use of membership lists for political purpose, you're creating that balance. And if that's what you're asking to do, because I think that's what the whole process of people have been talking about, is we want to remove the influence. And I don't think you can just talk about the money without talking about the use of membership lists, and particularly in some areas where it is used as influence, especially when you get money. You can only spend money on advertising for your position as a candidate. But when you get vetted by somebody to be a candidate, to be on their list and support, that's a greater, to me, influence in that process. So if we're sending a letter and council supports that direction to send a letter, that's something of the unintended consequences I think that Mr. O'Neill has mentioned needs to be added into the letter for them to look at to create that fairness and balance across the board. Because the big issue through the election campaign and even our municipal campaign is talked about the influence and how that influences. So I want to make sure that we get all the parts to it that could be considered influence over candidates. And when I talk memberships, I use unions, but I'm also using all the community associations, everything else. I'm taking the whole broad spectrum because you can't single one out from the other. But one group does it more professional and in a bigger way than any other small little local group does. They have a bigger impact.
And I appreciate you recognizing that lists are lists. Let's not target out one group. There's sports groups, there's community groups, there's lists. Okay.
But it's influence.
Yep, okay, thank you. Councillor Zarello.
Well, I've got to thank both of you. I mean, I really don't want to get into this conversation because it's a never-ending conversation, but I have to thank Councillor Asmussen for talking about that. The membership lists, I've always had an issue with the sports groups. They endorse candidates and then they send out an email to their membership lists, and those people are just innocent bystanders that want their son or daughter to play a sport in the city of Coquitlam. It's absolutely unnecessary, in my opinion. So thank you for bringing that up. But then that comes up to the question about, are we talking about writing a letter where we say, yes, we want to remove the money, we want to keep the money, which we've just admitted is influence, but we want to take out the membership as influence. I mean, it's actually quite comical. And the other thing I want to talk about is, I'm not sure why we think it's okay to start making assumptions about the unions and talking about them in a way that's maybe not the nicest or the most positive presentation, but then we want to piggyback on their increases ourselves at council. We want to take the QP raise, we want to take the QP increases, but we're going to send a level to the government to say we don't.
Okay, I'm going to accept the point of order, and I just, when I said to Councillor Asman, said I don't think we should go into
I'm saying
specific groups. I know, but we're very clear for it. He said he did say lists in general, and I think that's
no. He talked about the union,
and I
then
asked,
you.
I know, and I said, and he mentioned it, and I said thank you, because if he hadn't, I would have. I've got Councillor Marsden, Councillor Wilson, and then Mayor Stewart.
Thank you. So the question that Councillor O'Neill brought to us is, would we support sending a letter saying campaign finance reform is going to be considered? We want you to consider the full spectrum of impacts. Yeah. That's really what the question is. And would I support that? Absolutely. If you want to delve down into the discussion about would I support campaign finance reform, absolutely. I've made some very public statements with regards to the last provincial election where I pointed out, I said, at what point did being a business become a bad thing? At what point did aspiring for success, financial success for you and your family, become a bad thing? There's nothing wrong with that. In the U.S., they referred to it as seeking the American dream. That was success, however you chose to define it for your family. So I think the fact that we've castigated unions as bad things or bad people, or business owners as bad people, I think is a really sad state. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a Teamster household. My father was a very proud card-carrying Teamster member, and he voted a certain way for much of his life because of that. And then he came around and said, no, you know what? I'm looking at a bigger picture, and decided to go a different way. So I fully support campaign finance reform, and whether that be limitations, whether it be saying yay or nay to certain groups, whether it be management of lists, I think that's good. And so the question before us that Councillor O'Neill has very clearly brought forward is, would we support a letter that says we encourage you to take a look at it, but we encourage you to broaden the scope beyond some of the rhetoric that has been brought about during the provincial campaign. And I would firmly support that, because I think there needs to be stuff. We got to make sure that elections are open to everybody. That's not just those that are connected to a party or a membership list or a special interest group, or just somebody that's just happens to be wealthy and decides they're going to fund their way to the top, as we've seen happen in some cases. We need to make sure that we cover that off. So as long as we put some breadth to that letter that covers off some of the discussion, I would fully support it. I appreciate you bringing it forward.
Okay. Councillor Wilson and then Mayor Stewart.
I can support sending a letter talking about, the caution and making sure that we remind them of the differences between a provincial election and a municipal election, for sure. But I think it's got to be a simple, straightforward letter. There's been all kinds of rounds of consultations done, and the ideas that we've come up with here to talk about, people have talked about those ad nauseum, right? They don't need to hear that in a letter from us. Because they've got binders of those kind of suggestions already. So the main goal is to have fairness and trust in the electoral system, and that's what we want, and that's all we got to remind them. So, thank you.
Mayor Stewart, thank you.
Thank you. The letter is about caution. I don't know how anyone could be opposed to a letter that says caution. Consider all the realities, as Councillor Marsden said. Our household got dozens of pieces of mail in the last couple of months, because I've got a daughter who works in a municipal function as a member, and is a member of QP, and I've got our household also has a teacher. That would still happen, of course. You can take away union donations, but the union still gets to do all of those things under every scenario. Of course, corporations can't do that. Corporations wouldn't be able to send to their customers or to their. Okay,
point of order. I stuck to the.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. There has been some discussion about like 80% support taking away the big money, and yet that poll was done actually entirely about provincial and federal. It had nothing to do with municipal. Municipal is completely different. Provincially and federally, if you give $100 to a party, you only gave $25 of your own, and $75 came from the taxpayers, because you get a tax credit of 75% or more.
That's why I talked about the differences.
And so that's a significant difference. And if you obviously cannot treat the local government as you treat provincial government in this regard without solving that, because if you don't solve for that, then you're essentially suggesting that people donate to municipal campaigns with after-tax dollars, which is going to be dozens of people total in the course of a campaign. I suspect not enough to be able to finance a campaign. Every property owner in Coquitlam gets to vote in a municipal election. Well, not every property owner. Corporations don't get to vote. It doesn't matter how much property they own, they don't get to vote. And I was saying they also don't get to participate in the campaign. And I'm not sure whether that's valid. But there are incredible inequities, and I knew them when I was a municipal employee. And if you're a parks employee for the city or a firefighter or a whatever, doesn't matter what your perspective is. It doesn't even matter if your spouse is running for provincial office. You are required to donate to one party, and in some cases to donate to your spouse's opponent. And that has happened in recent history, where you're essentially working against your spouse's dollars, are working against yourself in a campaign. So absolutely, there's been lots of arguments about collective bargaining is the function of union dues, and union dues should only be spent on collective bargaining or strike pay. But to spend it on the kinds of issues so we hear all of those, and I'm not arguing one side or the other. I'm just saying that all of that has to be contemplated a little bit, and I think caution is the way you go forward. It's not by simply treating municipal government in one way like provincial government and ignoring that enormous disparity between the way elections are financed provincially and locally, and that is the tax credit.
Thank you. The second round I had myself. I think this is why when I said earlier, I think that without taking a position, because I don't think I agree. I think we need election reform. Councillor Marsden has said that. I think that and I don't know that it's up to this council to take positions. I think what we should be saying is, be aware of unintended consequences, be aware of these issues. I don't know that I would feel comfortable taking stands on what is in and what is out. Just to say is, we've heard during the campaign that you want election reform, and that we urge you to explore all options and look at the consequences. I agree. I heard the same figure that Councillor Zarillo used about people want to see reform. They want to see the banning of this money. I heard about it. I was in a very interesting debate at a Christmas party right after the last election. And people said, well, take the money out. And I said, well, okay, I agree you want to. Where will the money come from? And I said to the person, have you donated to a civic campaign in the last election? No. And I think that while people say they want the money from unions and business out, I went home that night and counted, and I think it was 50 or 60, and I thought 120,000 residents in Coquitlam and 50 people donated to a campaign of between 20 candidates. So the donation level is very low. So while people are saying take this money out, but they're not offering the solutions, and I think that's what the letter has to say is, election reform, finance reform is reform. It's not a ban. I think the government has to look at some solutions as to how they're going to do it to provide it fair for, as I think one councillor said, incumbents and non-affiliated. And I think that I welcome the government looking into this, but I think they have to actually look into it and not just take a reactionary approach. They have to actually study this and come up with some solutions. Okay, second round, we'll go back to Councillor Cirillo.
Yep, so I just wanted to address something Mayor Stewart said about corporations can't do that. They can't do brochures like the market, I think he referred to CUPE and school district, the teachers union. They certainly can do marketing. They did. In fact, I know of a corporation that was behind the No Slates Tri-City, both the website and the marketing material. And they also fund all of our brochures basically right now, or at least half of the marketing that gets done is corporations'
Point
money.
of order. She's refuting something I didn't say. I didn't say that, so please don't refute me.
Okay.
You always never say anything, Mayor Stewart. And then I would also say that Mayor Stewart also said that and that he's also in a situation where people in his home have had to donate to some sort of union campaign that might even be supporting a candidate that's running against him. And I would say that any homeowner in Coquitlam that has purchased a home that came from a developer or a home builder that contributes to any of our campaigns, including me, might be put in that same situation. They might be unknowingly paying for a candidate that they don't like, don't want, don't agree with. And it could be your very own spouse. So I just want to say, there's two sides to every story, and one person's reality is not necessarily another. So I just want to make that very clear, that corporations are actively involved in marketing for and against candidates.
Councillor Tanner, did you have something once I spoke the rap, but you haven't spoke yet?
So I heard a lot over the provincial campaign about big money, big money, big money. Well, there's no big money at the municipal level. It's $500 or $1,000, maybe $2,000. That's not big money. And I don't think any of us, I spoke to this, look at our donation list. We phoned up the person who managed our campaign finance manager. I've never called her up and asked before a public hearing or anything. So the campaign that I kept hearing about was big money. So I haven't heard whether reform is coming down to the municipal level. So in case it is, in case they are considering that, I think writing a letter is a really good idea to make them aware of these unintended consequences and how local government is funded, and it is different than the other levels of government. So exercising caution, being aware of unintended consequences, and everything we've talked about is a good idea, and I would support sending the letter as well.
So the motion before us was, or the recommendation, because this committee's a recommendation.
Through the chair, I can reiterate Councillor O'Neill's request, so that the mayor, on behalf of council, send a letter to the 3 MLA representatives in Coquitlam outlining
No. The 3 leaders of the
three leaders of the parties in Coquitlam outlining the potential
of the province. 3 provincial leaders.
3 provincial leaders outlining the potential unintended consequences of election donation restrictions specific to corporate and union donations on a municipal level.
And members?
No, I think that's
good.
I think that's
bringing their alert to it.
Of unintended consequences.
We're not that goes into the unintended consequences.
Caution.
All the issues raised here.
Yeah, I think all the issues. I think I just come from that. Councillor, sorry.
The wording says be cautious of the unintended consequences. So what are the unintended consequences?
Oh, there are probably 1,000 of them.
Yeah.
Or to explore unintended consequences and
ignore the positives,
or look for solutions.
I think there's consensus in support of that statement.
So I'm just going to make sure that we're also saying that we also are just the unintended consequences, positive and negative, or just the negative ones. Are we being very idealistic, or are we being open?
It's the unintended negative consequences is what I was talking about.
No, I'd be fine with the unintended positive consequence. I can't think of any unintended positive consequences because the reason they're doing this is for the potential positive consequences.
So the unintended.
The unintended typically are things that are negative or counteract some of the positives.
Okay, I got Councillor Marston.
I still have the floor, I think.
Sure, okay, Councillor Cirillo,
I
and then
think I'm going to
Councillor
look up
Marston.
unintended, because I'm pretty sure it doesn't have a negative. You can have an unintended positive consequence.
I just said that, yeah.
No. So.
I'll go to Councillor Marston and then come back to you if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay,
I might suggest the letter could address the intended and unintended consequences of any campaign finance reform.
All consequences.
All consequences.
All consequences.
Yeah.
And no, we need within membership lists.
All is good. It's shorter. Let's go.
Okay.
Okay.
So are they going to look at it and go, what's this
Yeah.
about?
Yeah.
Well, just to be clear, the letter isn't going to say is necessarily intended and intended. The letter is
That is
going
the
to just
direction.
outline some of the concerns that we have heard here, requesting if you limited it, how would you? So well, that's where
Here's some of the issues raised.
the issues. It will list some of the issues and concerns that could be raised. Okay, Councillor Zarrell, I said I'd come back to you, sir.
That just goes with, are we listing or not? So unintended consequences are outcomes that are not foreseen and intended by a purposeful action. So we know that there could be a purposeful action.
So they could be positive or negative.
No.
Yeah. Councillor O'Neill.
So this is the sort of the motion. It's not really a motion. It's sort of direction or approval from committee to allow the mayor to write a letter, and the mayor will elaborate the letter. In that letter, he will elaborate on what this means, and he will refer to the notes and the consensus that's around the table, and he'll send us a copy of it. So I'm sure he'll be very judicious in the choice of his words and reflect the caution that the committee wants to show, with which the committee would like the provincial government to proceed on this issue. Caution.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
All right. Those in favor of sending the letter to the 3 provincial leaders?
Yeah.
Any opposed to sending that? Councillor Cirillo is opposed to sending the letter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to OB2. OB2 was raised by Councillor Cirillo and concerns FCM Standing Committee's renewal.
Okay, so we're about to test the law of reciprocity right now. So I have been.
You got to look that up.
Well, it was actually involved in the first round of this. So
do you want to raise it again then?
no,
you want to remind us of the negative stuff?
Sorry.
the reciprocity law was invoked in the first round of this, so I could, but it was not an open discussion.
If you want us to be reciprocity, if you want us to be have reciprocity, you're inviting it then.
I think that maybe we'll.
What are we doing?
Okay, is it a request for FCM?
Yes, so
Maybe we could hear the request,
So the
please.
FCM is coming up again this week. I'll be going off to FCM, and I am on the standing committees, and I would like to reapply for the standing committees, and it takes support of colleagues for anyone to stand for standing committees. So I'm requesting today from this committee the opportunity to stand again and to submit my application for the FCM standing committees for 2017 to 18.
Great, and I've got, okay, I'll go to Mr. Dumont.
Just when we start, for process, these appointments usually go through regular council, so if council is supportive, we could bring it back to the public meeting on the 14th for formal ratification of Councillor Cirillo as a FCM representative. I was just looking online a few minutes ago, and the deadline for applying is June 16th. So if it comes back on the 12th, there is time, but it would probably be helpful if you could give general direction today about
General direction?
where you want to go.
Okay, I've got Councillor O'Neill, myself.
Clarification from Councillor Cirillo here. Does she want us to vote against her so she can use this as a political issue, or does she actually want to be on the FCM?
I actually want to be. I think it's very important.
Then let's keep it at that, okay?
Thank you, Councillor O'Neill. Okay, I'm going to support that. I think there's benefit to having representation. So I think that it's worth bringing it forward to council. I recognize that this is volunteer time, and I think that there is benefit to the city, and certainly worthy of having that discussion. And I will support moving it forward to a council where it can be formally endorsed. Okay, I've got Mayor Stewart next.
Thank you. As I've said before, I always support council members, and I think council has generally always supported council members in their wish to work at the provincial or federal level. I think we get benefit from it. I'm offended by the comment, but I'll set it aside and I will support it. And I will. But however, I'd also contemplated or been asked by I've been asked to contemplate putting my name forward on a committee, and I would like to put mine forward as well. And so I'm not sure I will yet, but I at least this will allow a possibility. So, and I will be supportive of Councillor Cirillo.
And just for clarification, there are multiple committees. It's not just one. It's not on the actual board of FCM, so it is possible to have people on different committees. I just want to clarify. So we could have somebody on this committee and somebody else on this committee.
Yes, through the chair, there's, if you go to the FCM site, there's a list of standing committees and forums. There's about a dozen different standing committees, so there is opportunity for other people to serve on committees as well. One of the requirements in the application form, and the reason Councillor Cirillo is bringing it forward, is it says it requires the consent of council for you to serve on those standing committees.
Good. I think I had Councillor Mars. I saw his hand. Did yours go up? And then I have Councillor Reid.
So appreciate that the request was made last year as well, and you were appointed at the discretion of the FCM president to certain things. So my question I would have for staff, if they can prepare, because this will be for the June 14th meeting, is that correct?
June 12th.
June 12th, okay. So unfortunately I'm going to be away on June the 12th, so I won't be there to ask this, but I would ask that it come forward in the report then. Could we get some sort of indication of the financial implications in the past with regards to engagement on this? I believe it would be in our financial disclosures. So Councillor Cirillo was on it last year. If there's anybody else on committees, if they could have that information, the implications of the financial implications. Appreciate what the mayor has said with regards to there being value to these things. I absolutely think there can be. And I think it's important that the information at these committees come back to the council and to the committee and to the community at large, much we do with all our other committee meetings. So I don't know what the protocol is for reports back on this sort of thing, but I would think that for future we should ask that there be some sort of reporting. And I appreciate this is being brought up in advance of any expenditures, because I think it is important that we acknowledge these and grant approval with them in advance of the expenditure, to avoid putting councillors in the awkward position of voting for reimbursement on things in the past, as has happened. Thank you very much.
To the chair, just to provide clarification, this would appear on the regular council agenda as a committee recommendation, so the minutes would go forward, and if there's any supplementary information that would be provided on this side to council for their information.
So I would ask in advance for that supplementary information. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Good. Okay. All in favor of sending the motion? Sorry. Okay.
So it would be that council support Councillor Cirillo and Mayor Stewart's participation on the FCM standing committees.
Okay, and the costs there too, or something?
Yeah, and the costs associated thereof.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll come to council. Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
Adjournment. Second.
Okay, adjournment's moved by Councillor Neal, second by Councillor Asmussen. All in favor? Any opposed? And they're adjourned. We'll reconvene and close short.